across the country, long lines continue forming at food banks. Many states are feeling the brunt of the massive unemployment in the wake of this pandemic. Needy families are also looking to the federal government for some help. The USDA reports food stamp enrollment is up 40% since March. Farmers have already donated more than 1 million pounds of food to food banks and asked the USDA to buy their crops and distribute them to those in need. So to talk about the food insecurity and food supplies, we are being joined by Joel Berg. He is the CEO of Hunger Free America. Thank you for being with us today, Joel. So in today's congressional $500 billion taxpayer bailout, increases for food stamps were actually not included in this, surprisingly. Why won't the government increase monies for food programs, especially when the Congressional Budget Office say food stamps are one of the most effective and efficient ways to support the economy during a downturn?
Well, thank you for focusing on this vital issue. And it's important to point out that as vital as food banks and soup kitchens and food pantries are, they're only about 1/10 the dollar amount of food provided by federal nutrition assistance programs. Why wasn't this money included in the bill? One simple word: Republicans. We are a nonpartisan organization, but that doesn't mean we ignore the reality. And the reality is that Speaker Pelosi and Democratic leader Schumer were pushing to have a SNAP food stamps increase in this bill, and the Trump White House and congressional Republicans vetoed it. The increase would have equaled about 20 cents a meal. 20 cents a meal. The average SNAP.
Shalom, Kahalayam, Wahawadla, Yahweh Basham, Yahweh Shai, Basham, Raka, Kodash. In the double honest, the apostles and elders of Great Millstone are very well. Peace and blessing to the Akim around the world that pushes through to the four corners of the earth. Right, this brother Yaba. You know, you're seeing more and more talk about what? Food shortages. And they talk about food shortages simply for those who can't afford it, but as the scriptures talk about, ultimately it will reach to the point where majority of the people will be affected. You understand? Now we know that the elites and the high people, they had to make it to the end, so the Lord will make a way that they will be able to survive. You understand? And have enough food power and so forth, because they had to be taken out of those bunkers and eventually be in hard bondage. Right? They're going to be the first fruits of hard bondage. But for all the other people who mightn't be able to afford it or so, you understand, they will go through a lot of hardship when it comes to hunger. Right? Just like the kind of things that Israel used to go through back then. 2/3 of Israel and a lot of these heathens going to go through the same things in times to come. Right? As I talk about what food shortages. And you see, there's always try to find some way to throw it off to make it look like, like to try to misplace the blame. They're trying to say it's Republicans, but really and truly, we know Republicans and Democrats, all of them work towards the same cause. It's not to say that it's two independent parties who actually are against each other. I believe the term is thesis and antithesis, right? When you have two opposing parties working towards the same cause, right?
Food stamps allotment now is about $1.34 per meal. This would have risen it to the princely sum of $1.54 a meal. And in the last recovery package, it was $2 billion bill, and the food increase would have been about 1% of the total package. And so honestly, Republicans were more interested in getting money to luxury steakhouses than they were to ensuring that working people who are hungry and unemployed people who are hungry can feed their own families.
Yeah, absolutely. And concern is obviously being raised not only about from this bill, but about the food supply chain and whether America will actually run out of food, driven in part, obviously, by the sight of these empty shelves. Those are artificial shortages, because this is just what it looks like. But the COVID outbreak at food plants like Smithfield in South Dakota, you're seeing farmers destroying billions of dollars worth of crops, dairy farmers dumping millions of gallons of milk literally down the tubes. There's unhatched eggs being destroyed, so because there's no demand for chicken, at the hotels and restaurants, nobody's eating out anymore. So how secure is the food supply chain, and does its distribution impact hungry Americans?
I think overall the food supply chain is mostly intact. I don't think people with money are ever really going to run out of food anytime in the near future. There may be certain meat or poultry items that run out just because meat processing plants, which were frankly pretty horrible places to work at before this, they've become COVID hotspots. So there might be some disruption in meat or poultry, maybe some eggs, but despite the fact that farmers are throwing out surplus products, the main food supply in America will by and large continue, as best I can tell. It's just that people without money won't be able to afford it.
And that is really the thing about it. These elites know that these things were going to happen. All these things is be orchestrated in some way by them. They knew that eventually they would use all these things as means of controls. Things like the viruses, things like food shortages, all of these things is what will actually help their agenda. Why? Because if you have a shortage of food and you have no money to buy, then you're completely dependable on the person who gives, right? But when you're dependable on somebody else, you're vulnerable to their will and not your own. And all these things will help them in their issuing of the mark of the beast, which is the RFID chip. Because when you have nothing to eat, that is when that temptation going to come in. It's either you eat or you take the chip and eat, or you starve, or even worse, it might have penalties of death and so forth. We know all of these are little things that add up towards the things that are to come. You understand? Because the elite's not going to go hungry. They have food stored away. They have a whole vault of seeds, and they probably have underground labs where they just grow stuff. They prepared for all of this. You understand? The majority of the people will be affected because the end of the day, that is prophecy. But they put things in place for this, and they're going to utilize situations like this to usher in their agendas. Sometimes that is how things like that is work, based on what problem and solution. You create a problem and then present a solution, but in the form that you want it, or to the outcome that you would like.
Right now, there are, before this crisis, 37 million Americans couldn't always afford enough food. Now the number is probably at least 50 million and maybe even more than that. So that's the real problem, money to buy food.
Yeah, and obviously that number of people who can't afford things is obviously going to grow with, numbers of unemployment soaring beyond that of the Great Depression. And a recent poll by your group, Hunger Free America, found that child hunger has soared fivefold with the U.S., at 37% of parents cutting the size of the meals or skipping meals entirely for their kids. Do you think this is happening because of this high unemployment, or are there other factors that should be implicated because of these food cuts?
There are two major reasons we've had soaring child hunger in America over the last few weeks. One, as you indicated, is this massive loss of jobs. The unemployment rate still isn't as high as the peak of the Depression, but the rapidity of the job loss is just amazing. In the Depression, it took from 1929 to 1933, 4 years, for that unemployment to increase to go into full effect, and we've had a massive job loss just in weeks. That's number one. And number two, in the United States, we do have school meals programs, and 29 million kids a day get school lunches at schools around the country. Many of those are low-income and lower-middle-income families. Many of them also get school breakfasts, and very, very, very few of those meals are being served today because the vast majority of those schools are closed.
Joel, real quickly, how do we help?
You can donate to Hunger Free America at hungerfreeamerica.org. You can volunteer through our website, or you can call 1-866-3-HUNGRY, 1-866-3-HUNGRY if you need food. So whether you need help or want to give help, Hunger Free America is there for you.
That is wonderful. Okay, thank you.
Just like most charity organizations, when you donate that, you don't even know if they'll actually give the people the food. Just like when people donate to the Red Cross, a lot of the money doesn't even reach where it needs to go. You understand? It's reaching other people's pockets. Anyway, hope it was edifying. We're seeing these things come into play more and more. And right now, I think the other day I saw it was 20-something million people in America applied for non-employment grants or something like that. And as time go by and things get worse, it's going to increase. Why? Because like how you're talking about the dairy farms, dumping milk, they could have nobody to actually buy the products. Eventually they will have to release workers because they can't pay the workers because the products are not being sold, and so forth and so forth. So eventually it's going to rise until what the time will be ripe or set for them to usher in what they need to usher in. You understand? Because the people will be in a completely vulnerable state. And when that time comes, the ones who actually believe in the Lord, they have to be ready to go through whatever it is they need to go through. And I hope I said fine. With that, I say shalom.